with Speaker of the House, Mr. Michael Johnson of the great state of Louisiana. Were you ever a radio host among your many skills?
I did that for a small time.
That's what I thought. I thought I remembered somewhere. So you understand what vamping is all about. And you've got a small TV set. We will thank John Roberts again. Mr. Speaker, thank you ever so much. First of all, thanks for buying us all a cup of coffee this morning. That was a very revealing off-the-record briefing. I might add it wasn't only Fox people. There are people, my friends from other networks. Can I just ask you this? I want to start. I know we should be talking about policy and the rest of it, but I'm saying, or I believe in my heart, look at what I look at, that the State of the Union is not good, that people are not happy, they don't feel prosperous, they don't feel confident, they, to some extent, are fearful because of the immigration problem and the crime problem that goes with it. I mean, it's not a good State of the Union. And you're going to be up there at the podium listening to President Biden. But, I mean, how do you sense this, too?
I think you said it very well in your riff in the opening of the program, Professor. I think you summarized it well. I think the American people are fed up with weaponized big government socialism, with the open borders that we have in this country. I think they're fed up with a high cost of living and with weakness that we're projecting on the world stage, because they see the effect, the direct effect that this is having on their lives and their families. And families are hurting. You know, inflation is up 17.9%. I saw the stat today. The average American household is paying $11,400 more annually just to make ends meet. You know, household debt is up at a record high. This is not a sustainable trajectory that we're on. And the media asked me over the weekend, somebody said, in one word, how would you describe the State of the Union? And I said, sadly, decline. We're declining in every metric. And I'm not sure this is something that we can continue any longer. And that's why the American people, I think, are going to deliver us a big victory in November. I
mean, the numbers are showing that, you know, traditional Democratic constituencies like Hispanic, Latinos, or blacks, for example, let's just start with those two. They did better under Trump than they've done under Biden. We've looked at the average weekly wages. I put it in my riff again, but I've written it so many times, my arm and wrist are getting sore. They did better, you know, their weekly wages, they had a pay raise under Trump. They've had a pay cut under Biden. That's not a good position to be in. Now, I'm hearing, we threw this out this morning at breakfast, but now, so Biden wants to solve this problem by raising taxes on successful businesses and entrepreneurs. But the point is, he's losing core constituencies because of this situation.
And he seems to be completely tone deaf about it. I mean, John Adams said facts are stubborn things, right? The facts are on our side. People can look at these things objectively and recognize that they had a better standard of living. They had more security. They had America was stronger when President Trump was in office. I mean, the first 2 years, you were there, you were part of it. We achieved the greatest economy in the history of the world, not just the U.S. And in every demographic, everyone was doing better. And they were safer. They were more secure. The crime was not through the roof as it is in every community in America. The border was secure. All these things. And they're looking at that and they're measuring that. And I think there's going to be a real energy. I think there's a huge enthusiasm gap in this election cycle. I've been in almost 20 states in the last several weeks, Larry, because when we're not in session, I'm flying around the country helping our candidates and my colleagues. It doesn't matter where I am, out west, Midwest, you know, Long Island or the Deep South. It's the same feel, the same sentiment that is out there in the base, and I think people are ready to make a change, and that's what's going to happen.
One of your most distinguished predecessors, Newt Gingrich, is writing about, Newt is a very dear friend of mine, mentor, advisor, and so forth. Trump is breaking up the old Democratic coalition because folks have done better under Trump than they've done under Biden. They're now pulling over. You see it with the Hispanic Latinos, but you know some of these numbers with women, with even college kids, even with African Americans. I mean, this could be a new coalition. Now, Speaker, what is your role? You're piloting the House. You're the North Star. I know it's a thin deck, but nonetheless, you have the political gavel and the political platform. How do you want to play this?
Well, listen, I think that we've got to demonstrate that we can govern. I think we hold fast to our core principles, the things that made America the greatest, most powerful, most extraordinary, most benevolent nation in the history of the world. Those things are in jeopardy because there's a rising number of people, including elected members of Congress on the other side, who are trying to dismantle the foundations of the country. That's the battle. It's not even ours versus D's. It's about the vision, who we are going to be as a country going forward. I'm delighted that Donald Trump is officially now our nominee. I think we work together. We're going to retake the White House. I think the Republicans will take the Senate, and I think we'll grow the House majority. By the way, before I forget, people can join us in that at growthemajority.com. That's our website. Everybody can be a part of this. And record numbers of people are, Larry. We have a record number of new donors coming into the fold, and that shows the enthusiasm that's out there. It's very real, and it's going to have a big effect in November.
I know you've got to run, Speaker. I just want to ask you, this came up at breakfast, but look, you're a constitutional lawyer. You know as well as I do. I'm not even a lawyer, but we did a lot of research. There's 2 sections of the U.S. immigration and nationalization law. This stuff has been passed by Congress and signed by presidents decades ago. Section 212F gives the president, any president, the power to stop people from crossing into the border illegally. And Section 287G, which I believe was passed in 1996 under Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich as Speaker, gives the president the power to work with local law enforcement to deport criminals. Now, Joe Biden keeps telling us publicly he doesn't have the power to do this. Apparently, he's told other people privately he understands he does have the power. He's just afraid to use it. I don't know. Help me out on this. And where is this going to lead? Because this is a gigantic issue.
It's a gigantic issue. I read those provisions of the law to the president myself on the phone about 2 months ago.
So I'm on the right track. This is real stuff.
And he acknowledged that those are provisions of the law. He claims for a while, he claimed that he didn't have the ability to use it. We're setting him straight on that. I'll tell you what, this afternoon, Larry, we voted on the Laken Riley Act.
Yes.
She's one of the latest victims of this illegal immigration, violent crime. The Biden administration is releasing violent criminals into the country. Communities all around the country. Georgia is not on the border, but every state is a border state now. And it's a tragedy. But 177 House Democrats just voted against the Laken Riley Act. What it would do is it would require ICE to detain criminals, criminal illegal immigrants who are engaged in crime, and to put them on a path to deportation. The Democrats oppose that. The White House opposes that.
How is that possible? In all honesty, putting politics aside, ordinary common sense people, how is that possible?
President Biden and Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security, engineered this catastrophe. Yes. They opened the border. We documented 64 specific executive actions and agency actions that they've taken since Joe Biden walked into the Oval Office, being on day 1, by the way, to create this situation. Why did they do it? I'm asked that in every town hall, in every forum, everywhere around the country. The answer is they ultimately hope to turn these people into voters. That's the answer. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but that's the fact. And Jerry Nadler, who you know is the chairman of the former chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, admitted that to me in a hearing late one night. Elon Musk found that video about a week and a half ago and shared it to about 60 million new people. This is what it's about. And as sinister as that sounds, they're apparently willing to allow Americans to be preyed upon and to be the victims of violent crime in their zeal to maintain power. That's what's going on.
This is one of the biggest problems with our State of the Union today. It's one of the biggest problems, the fear factor. Speaker Johnson, you're most gracious, sir. We appreciate it very, very much. We wish you luck.
I'm a big fan, and you know.
No, and likewise, same way.